Welcome to Ask Fear and Greed, where we take your questions and do our best to answer them. I'm Michael Thompson, and good afternoon, Sean Aylmer.
Good afternoon, Michael.
Sean, great question today. This one has come in from Joey via Instagram. There's, of course, many ways to send your question in: Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or at fearandgreed.com.au. But Joey chose Instagram, and he said, the ASX hit 8,000 points this week. We hear this kind of statement all the time, but what are these 8,000 points? What does it actually refer to? Over to you, Sean.
Good question. Well, the points actually represent an index. They don't represent dollars or units of anything. It's just an index so that you can measure things today versus a year ago versus a year's time. So the current S&P ASX 200 started on the 31st of March 2000. That's when this index was created. Its first value was 3,133.3 points, which is an unusual starting place, I do agree, but it was equal to the value of the All Ordinaries. Now, the All Ordinaries is actually a broader measure of stocks on the ASX. It, too, is another index. It includes about 500 companies. It's much older than the ASX 200, so the All Ordinaries was created back in 1980, and it was given a value of 500 points. That grew to 3,133.3 points. On the 31st of March 2000, they introduced the ASX 200. That's what was given. So when we say the index has gone through 8,000 points, all we're saying is that the value of the market is about 2.5 times the value in March 2000. That's all it is. Joey's alluding to the notion that a number like 8,000 points represents something important. Like, is it more important than 7,900? Is it less important than, 8,241 points? It isn't. It doesn't mean anything, really. It's just that we humans like big round numbers.
But don't you hear about those big round numbers being psychological barriers? And you hear about it in the US a bit as well, where different indexes kind of can't quite push through a certain level, and then finally it does, and everyone just breathes a big sigh of relief.
But it's like the 100 metres. What's the record for the 100 metres? 9.58 or something or other. Like, will anyone ever get below 9.5 for the 100 metres? It's not much difference between 9.51 and 9.49, but it's just kind of what we want. And the index, the market, is exactly the same.
Okay.
Now, the ASX 200 is just part of the ASX, and the ASX is the Australian Securities Exchange. There are actually more than 200 companies listed on the ASX, and the ASX 200 measures the 200 largest. The index itself is weighted, so the Commonwealth Bank, the largest company on the bourse, gets a higher weighting in the ASX 200 than the number 2 company, BHP. BHP gets a higher weighting than the number 3 company, CSL, and so on and so on. Once every 3 months, Dow Jones Indices checks to see if the 200 on the list are still the largest. If they're not, it changes the index. Finally, a comment on the ASX. It was actually formed in 1987. Prior to that, there was different state-based exchanges. They were merged in 1987. Then in 2006, the Australian Stock Exchange merged with the Sydney's Futures Exchange, and that created the Australian Securities Exchange. So the whole point to Joey's question, it's true. The actual number doesn't mean much. It's just an index that measures a numbers now versus a year's time versus 15 years. And that's all it is.
I'm just going to ask you a little follow-up question here, at the risk of making myself sound ignorant. But the All Ordinaries, I didn't realise that was 500 companies. And so is that the equivalent of could we essentially be calling that the S&P ASX 500?
Broadly, yeah. Yeah.
I have learned so much in the last, 4.5 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the point is that the ASX 200 by far makes up the big value of the ASX. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, the top 10 stocks makes up a big value of the ASX 200, or the top 20 stocks certainly, like the majority of the ASX 200. So, yeah, it's kind of... Did you know that? Did you guess what the first stock ever traded was? Well, no, that's not quite true. I have to think about this. So the first company founded in New South Wales... I want the current day name. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to get the name right, but it's the current.
Was it a bank?
Yeah, it was.
And it wasn't the Commonwealth Bank?
No, it was Westpac. It was known as the Bank of New South Wales, incorporated in 1817.
Oh,
And then they were like, they didn't really trade then. It was about the 1850s, I think, that stock exchanges were formed. Places like Melbourne, Bendigo, Ballarat, they all had their own stock exchanges. They were pretty short-lived. But kind of one of the little trivia things, good one for you, is that the original share brokers with these two guys, Matthew Gregson and William Barton. William Barton is actually the father of Edmund Barton, who's Australia's first Prime Minister.
what a fantastic piece of trivia to finish on.
That is a good piece of trivia, isn't it? Yeah.
God, you've certainly delivered today. You've answered Joey's question, you've answered my question, and then you've added about 3 pieces of trivia onto the end.
There
So
you go.
I know we are marking our own homework here, Sean, but I'm going to say there's a high distinction.
Oh, once again, there we go.
Oh, what a surprise. That's 7 high distinctions in a row. Thank you very much, Joey, for the question, and thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Joey, for the question. It was a good one.
Indeed it was. Remember, if you've got something you'd like to know, then send it through via LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or at fearandgreed.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is Ask Fear and Greed.